Hello, welcome back to our Fireside chat for November. Uh, we have this event on a monthly basis to try to bring some face-to-face engagement with our MOOC. Uh, the way I try to run this is I get a guest speaker to come and give a presentation on a topic of I think interest in experimental design, and we've had over 40 of these. So this has been something that I've greatly enjoyed doing, and we've had some wonderful guests. We always have time for questions and answers at the end of our guest presentation. So if you're taking the Coursera MOOC or just simply applying experimental design in your work, or curious to learn more, you may be trying to have a particular application and have questions about that. All of those are things that you should feel free to ask us about, and we'll try to answer those. If you can't join us live, we always post these fireside chat recordings on our LinkedIn page, which is also linked to our YouTube channel, and we'll share that link for you in the meeting chat. If you're actually a participant in the Coursera course, then these recordings are also available in your course under the Resources tab. A quick reminder, please continue to keep your microphones muted and your cameras off during the session so that we don't have any extraneous noise. Barking dogs are always great, but I love dogs. But we don't need them, during the session. If you have a question that you want to have us talk about, you can submit that by using the chat function on your Zoom menu, and you don't need to wait until the Q&A session begins. You can start putting that question in anytime during our chat session. If your question doesn't get answered during this time, we will try to respond to it in Coursera for those people that are enrolled in the course. My guest today, I feel so lucky to have Dave Edwards as my guest. David J. Edwards is professor and head of mathematics and data analysis at the Citadel, which is the Military College of South Carolina. And prior to joining the Citadel, he was professor and chair of statistical sciences and operations research at Virginia Commonwealth University. He has a BS in mathematics from Virginia Tech, so he's another proud Hokie, just like me. And he has an MS and PhD in statistics from the University of Tennessee. His research is focused on applied statistics and data analytics, with special interest in design and analysis of experiments, model selection, and interpretable machine learning. He's very heavily involved in interdisciplinary research. He's worked on very wide variety of projects, things like air transportation, middle school math specialization, pharmaceutical engineering, and the human microbiome. Dr. Edwards is a fellow of the American Statistical Association, former editor-in-chief of Quality Engineering, one of the really important journals in our field devoted to applied statistical methods for practice, and is a former associate editor of Technometrics, another one of our major journals in engineering statistics. So with that, I am thrilled to have David Edwards back. He's back again. He's a repeat offender. So I'm pleased to have him back again. And David, I'm going to turn it over to you for your presentation.
All right. Thank you, Doug, and appreciate you having me back again. All right. So, again, thank you for that introduction. It's nice to be able to talk about this. And I am in no way going to profess that I have all the answers here. I think the field is much too large to be able to do that. But one of the things that um, myself and colleagues noticed in recent years was this propensity to attempt to use machine learning methods along with designed experiments, which seemed kind of foreign to us because the general knowledge or the general accepted way of analyzing experiments is to use more traditional statistical methods, particularly fitting linear models. So my talk today is going to be talking about the use of cross-validation in the analysis of designed experiments. And because there's no way I can answer all the questions, I feel like this is more of a high level talk, but I'll certainly look at some of the empirical things that we've investigated, trying to answer maybe some of the questions and to perhaps provide a little bit of an impetus for future research. So whether or not it's recommended, and again, still can't say for sure, there's a notable increase in the use of machine learning methods to analyze small designed experiments. Particularly, what we've been seeing more of is the use of artificial neural networks to analyze designed experiments. Uh, I work a bit with engineering colleagues at particularly my previous institution at VCU, and one particular group I worked with was pharmaceutical engineering, which is actually a very fascinating area. We're actually looking at the best ways to deliver drugs. You know, the one project working on recently was delivering chemotherapy directly to the lungs using inhalation methods. I've worked with a lot of students there, and I've been training them in design of experiments and how to effectively design experiments. And I'm always, in a sense, very traditional when it comes to how do we analyze the experiments, because we think about analyzing these experiments, we should be doing a really good job collecting the data. It's very systematic, very methodical. And we think, okay, if we're doing a good job there, then we can use some simple models in order to fit that data. And yet I've seen some graduate students and some colleagues in engineering say, oh, let's just use machine learning. Let's throw machine learning methods at these very small experiments, which shocked me because to the best of my knowledge, and again, I can't speak for the entire profession, to the best of my knowledge, it's generally assumed that we would have large amounts of data before we tried to throw something like a neural network at it. And yet, it seems to be happening. A lot of publications coming out where machine learning methods are being used to analyze structured small experiments. So we've seen a lot of that. Within the design of experiments community, it's been generally understood that cross-validation, which is a method that helps us tune and fit machine learning methods, using that to help analyze small structured designs is going to be a poor thing to do. I'll talk a little bit more about that because today's talk really is mainly focused on cross-validation. But these two observations are really connected to each other because cross-validation, like I said, is commonly used to tune machine learning, even in the case of experiments. So here's a look at just some Web of Science citations over the years. It goes back to about 2023 here. So 1990 to 2023, the query is at the bottom that was used. So this was Web of Science. We insisted on the words design of experiments and machine learning showing up, or experimental design and machine learning. But we didn't include things like active learning or Gaussian process monitoring or hyperparameter tuning. Those were not things that were part of our objective of searching for things. And so you can see that around 1990 there was pretty much nothing. But that just within the last 5-6 years or so, there's been a lot more publications on this. And these are actual Web of Science, query hits. There's obviously more because this is just one query, but you can just see kind of how much it's exploded since, maybe 2016, 2017. Here's a quick look at just a smattering of some of the literature. You can see articles that from 2014 to 2023, most of them within the past few years. And you can see the applications over to the right, kind of a wide variety of applications, things related to engineering applications, but also things like water pollution, material science, bioprocesses, 3D printing, a lot of cool applications. There in the second column, you can see the designs that were used in these papers. Some of the familiar things, probably many of you have seen, such as full factorial designs, central composite designs, box banking designs, fractional factorials, optimal designs. They're all being used in these papers, and the models that are being fit to these experiments are in the third column. And I won't read all of these, but ANN stands for Artificial Neural Network, DT for decision trees. We've got things like random forest models, support vector machines, all being used to analyze very traditional experimental designs. So the general wisdom of using regression models seems to just kind of be thrown out the window in this case. It's almost as if they're not even trying it, and they're using this machine learning methods to analyze these small structured experiments. Here's an example of a paper that, and I don't intend for you to be able to read the words here, just kind of an example of the paper, Microfluidic Manufacturing of Liposomes, Development and Optimization by Design of Experiments in Machine Learning. And the journal is just Applied Materials and Interfaces. And here's what they did, which honestly, we were not able to replicate. When I say we, I'm referring to myself and my co-authors on this work. We took the data, we were just unable to fully replicate their results, can be unfortunate and also problematic at the same time. But they took a 28 run D-optimal design in 5 factors for 2 responses. And if D-optimal designs are experiments that are algorithmically generated typically, particularly for weird run sizes like 28 runs, and usually a model is being specified. The interesting thing here, if I'm remembering correctly, and please don't quote me on it, is they were only asking for a main effects only model, and this for 5 factors. They found 3 active factors and then followed that up with a central composite design in 25 runs for both of the responses, set the 2 remaining factors constant. And then they used another 12-run experiment with the same 3 factors, and then eventually combined all of those experiments that they ran, normalized the data, did some training testing split, just a random 80% training set, and then constructed an artificial neural network with 2 hidden layers, 14 hidden units. I am in no way, shape, or form an expert in artificial neural networks. But using kind of the data was available to us, we were not able to replicate it. So to us, it was just an interesting example of something that felt very ad hoc. Starting with things that are well-known traditional experiments and then just kind of throwing some things together and throwing a machine learning method at it. So this is happening. And here's an actual publication where things like this are happening in practice. I think this has gotten some attention, and so here's a article that was in. I didn't include I believe this is Quality and Reliability Engineering International, Doug, your journal, and
Yeah,
the
it looks like our format.
and this paper here is Design Choice and Machine Learning Model Performance. So, like I said, this is kind of getting some attention, and this group of authors here decided to investigate a little bit of different machine learning methods and design choices to see how they behave. So they looked at a variety of different methods, artificial neural networks, random forest, support vector machines, something they called automated machine learning. All of these methods did require some bit of cross-validation in order to tune them. Then they also looked at some non-cross validation methods like Gaussian process modeling, stepwise regression for second-order models. They looked at a variety of designs, central composite designs, box making designs, D-optimal, I-optimal, Max Pro, which is a space-filling design, and then Latin hypercube designs. And they did a pretty extensive simulation study to evaluate these methods, these designs, and how they did in out-of-sample predictions using what they called complex surfaces. And in the end, they found that Gaussian process models worked really well with Max Pro designs, which perhaps isn't too surprising. Gaussian process modeling, which is kind of a more of a smoothing type method, has been shown to be preferred or works really well with these space filling designs. So we kind of dug into this paper and read it a bit, and we thought very nice comprehensive study, and they made some mention of cross validation, but it wasn't very extensive. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about what cross-validation is in case you have no idea. It is a data-driven modeling method, which is allowing us to use all of the available data um, while still being able to do what we call out-of-sample evaluation to control overfitting and optimize performance. So we have things like k-fold cross-validation, which is usually easier understood if you look at the schematic, the figure at the bottom. Um, let's say your original data are those colored shapes down there. What you would do is you would split your data up into groups, train your model on a subset, and then predict on what you've left out. So, for example, let's say we've got something like threefold cross-validation. What you would do for, say, CV group number one down there is you would train your model on the shapes and colors that you see there on the left, and then based on that model, predict what's been pulled out. Then you would do it for another subset of the data. So now you're going to train on a different group and predict on a different group and do it, say, another time here if it was threefold cross-validation. And then what you would do is you would typically pick the model that minimizes your root mean square prediction error. So we're trying to make the prediction errors as small as possible. But what this technique allows us to do is to kind of train and test using all the data. So there's no holdout sample where you're pulling it out and you're not using it at all. This allows us to kind of have multiple training sets, multiple validation sets using all of the data. So k-fold cross-validation is uh, five-fold, 10-fold cross-validation are pretty typical methods, but there's also leave one out cross-validation, which just removes one at a time. So remove one observation at a time. And so that can take a little bit longer because now you have n folds. But we're going to explore kind of all of these possibilities. So our research questions are, and here's where we're kind of moving away a little bit from the machine learning aspect. Regression has been the tried and true preferred way of analyzing experiments. How does prediction using regression with cross-validation compare to standard methods? How does regression with cross-validation fare at screening compared to other commonly used screening methods? Is leave one out cross-validation preferred given the size and structure of designs? So we are, I think, one of the first to actually try and investigate this question a little bit deeper because up to this point, the typical approach has been don't do this at all. So don't use cross-validation methods at all. Here's a paper, an efficient variable selection approach for analyzing designed experiments that appeared in Technometrics. And on page 438, they say, in principle, these approaches can be applied to our methods as well, but the limited run size often makes these automated selection methods questionable in practice. Automated selection methods often require something like cross-validation to tune and select the model. And so here was one article that said, designs are just too small to use cross-validation. Here's another one. This is another paper from Technometrics called Screening Strategies in the Presence of Interactions. And they said on page 4, in our study, where the designs are highly structured and the number of possible regression coefficients greatly exceeds the number of observations, we found that cross-validation performed poorly. So, for example, there are methods, regularization methods like the lasso, which kind of helps a little bit with automated variable selection. It's very popular these days. It's almost kind of one of these tried and true methods for analyzing experimental data now, that one along with the Danzig selector. But it has these tuning parameters to help you choose the model. And one way to do that tuning is to use cross-validation. But up to this point, it really hasn't been recommended. It's saying, well, designed experiments are too small and too structured for us to do these holdout samples. If I pull some data out to train on what's left, well, then in a sense, I don't know if you can see me, I'm air quoting, we've destroyed the structure of the design. And if we've destroyed the structure of the design, then maybe it won't do that well when it comes to fitting a model of interest. Here's another paper. It says current design and analysis strategies do not guarantee high prediction performance, partly due to the small sample sizes that prevent partitioning the data into training and validation sets, a strategy that is commonly used in machine learning models to improve out-of-sample prediction. So here's three papers that are kind of saying just don't do it. But we were curious. We were like, well, it wouldn't hurt anything to take a closer look at how well does cross-validation and say regression methods work together. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk a little bit now about our simulation study that we performed using both response surface designs to look at prediction accuracy, as well as more traditional screening experiments just to look at how well do I find the best fitting model. So I'll start with the response surface aspect. And the reason why a lot of times we think about response surface experiments as helping us to do some sort of optimization, and we want good prediction quality. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to look at a number of different methods. One is just to fit the full second order model. So that is typically what one does in practice, very traditional approach to running say, an essential composite design, a box banking design. We've got other types of designs out there, like OMAR's designs now these days, or definitive screening designs, and our goal being to look at quadratic curvature. If we have the ability to, maybe we can fit the full second order model. Or maybe we would like to use best subsets regression using cross-validation to choose the model. Or let's try something like random forest to choose the model using cross-validation. Those are the three main ones that I'll start with. There was a resampling procedure that we considered known as the little bootstrap. We included it because it was invented sometime in the 90s by the same guy that invented classification regression trees, Leo Breiman. And this was one of the few papers in the literature that we found that actually commented on the case against using cross-validation in structured small experiments. And the recommendation was to use something called the little bootstrap, which is similar to the ordinary bootstrap where you are doing some resampling. But I won't comment too much more on it. We used it, we looked at it. It actually showed quite a bit of variable performance and wasn't the overall recommended method in the end. So if you have further questions about the little bootstrap, feel free to send me an email. But I will just mention that we did it, but I won't say too much more about it. I'll mainly focus on things like doing best subsets regression in general. So how do you do regression with cross-validation? So this James et al. Is actually a textbook, the Introduction to Statistical Learning, which is a widely used textbook these days. He implemented best subsets regression using cross-validation to help choose the model. And here's how it worked. You would fit all subsets up to the full second order model using the cross-validation training data. And you would evaluate each subset. So in other words, subsets of size 2, size 3, size 4, size 5. How many terms are in the model? Evaluate each subset on the validation data, and then eventually choose the model size that had the lowest average prediction error across the case subsets. So using cross-validation, what you're going to do is fit models of, say, like I said, size 1, size 2, size 3, up to a certain size, and then you would pick the model size that was best using cross-validation. And then once you've decided the model size should have 6 terms in it, then go back and use all the data, fit the best 6 variable model, and look at the out-of-sample predicted values. So that's how regression with cross-validation was working. We were using cross-validation to decide, here's how many terms I should include in a model. The different design types we looked at were the same ones from that Quality and Reliability Engineering International paper from 2022. We looked at 2 different types of central composite designs, one that was face-centered and one where the axial distance was the square root of the number of factors. We looked at a box-Binkin design. We looked at an eye-optimal design because those are recommended for prediction. Those were generated using JUMP. And we also used Max Pro, which was space-filling designs using R. So we included those 5 different design types in the simulation study. And we did this for 2 different sizes, 16 runs and 3 factors, because it's pretty small. And so if there really is destruction of the structure of the design, we would expect it to happen for a design that small. And then for larger response surface designs, 52 runs and 6 factors. In order to kind of simulate response surfaces, we use this something called the response surface test bed. It was very helpful because in reality, it's not that easy to simulate data from complex response surfaces. So this allowed us to have a little bit of control over things like heredity, sparsity, the bumpiness, in other words, how unsmooth or smooth is the response surface we're looking at. And so we looked at creating second order surfaces and then sixth order surfaces, which we dubbed as complex surfaces. And that would be the ones that kind of like you can see here on the far right figure, a little more complex looking response surfaces. Simulation setup, we created the response surface, whether it was second order or complex, used a just standard experimental error rate of 1, sigma equals 1. Then we generated 1,000 uniformly distributed out of sample prediction points using the created response surface and just kind of put those to the side. Then using one of the analysis methods mentioned previously, we found the best model. And once we'd found the best model, we evaluated the model on those 1,000 out of sample points and calculated the root mean squared prediction error. Right, so how good are these models that we're finding doing when it comes to prediction for all these different points throughout the design region? Then we repeated the process 500 times. Here's a look at some of the results. And we'll start first with the 52-run 6-factor experiment for the complex surface. You can see all the design types there. We've got the box beacon, central composite with the axial distance, I-optimal, and the Max Pro designs. One thing you will notice is that in general, the central composite design with axial runs performed the best overall in terms of root mean square prediction error, which isn't typically a surprise because with the axial distances, we are going a little bit further beyond the typical -1 + 1 coding. And so we're kind of exploring the design space a little bit further than the others. And so it's not a surprise that we're seeing the best RMSPE performance for that central composite design. But what I really want you to look at is within each of the design types, what method seems to be performing the best in terms of the analysis. And what you'll notice is for the complex surfaces, you know, fitting typically the full regression model, that just fitting that second order regression model does quite well. If you're using actually with all of these in reality, using random forests does pretty well, which also isn't surprising. But the performance is somewhat even pretty much across the board. But we are seeing some gain to just fitting the full regression model. Random forests, whether we were using, say, k-fold, 5-fold cross-validation or leave one out cross-validation, perform pretty similarly to each other. If the true model was just a second order surface, random forests with cross-validation seem to break down a little bit, which we found to be interesting. If the true model was a second order model and it wasn't a very overly complex surface, we found it interesting that random forests were breaking down a little bit, perhaps because we were taking too many terms out of the model, or I'm sorry, not terms, but runs out of the design. And if you look at what seemed to be performing the best, once again, random forest with leave one out cross-validation did well. Regression with cross-validation performed well. Regression with leave one out cross-validation performed well for most of these designs. And so it kind of gave us a little bit of assurance or perhaps reassurance that maybe using cross-validation isn't really hurting that much here. Here's the smaller design. Kind of see the same thing. Pretty even performance, which I don't know if that was surprising or not. But once again, using these methods that use cross-validation are performing just as well as perhaps standard regression methods. Again, if the second order surface was the true surface, random forests on their own with cross-validation would not be recommended. Now, what about screening? So with screening, we're looking at usually highly fractionated, lots and lots of factors, small runs, and I want to find out which of the factors are driving the process. As opposed to response surface designs, where we're usually looking at perhaps three-level experiments, or in the case of axial runs, we've got 5 levels. These are typically two-level designs, where our goal is identify the major factors. The lasso with a data-driven threshold has kind of been pretty well accepted as something to use to help us analyze screening experiments, particularly in the presence of interactions. But we're going to take that and also use lasso with cross-validation to choose the tuning parameter. And we're also going to use best subsets regression with cross-validation. We're going to use some designs that were compared in this paper from 2017 in Technometrics. Two different types of orthogonal designs, a Bayesian d-optimal design, designs that are structured to estimate main effects in some two-factor interactions, and designs that are structured so that I can estimate all main effects and two-factor interactions involving a certain number of factors. And so different variety of design types that were used here, and very similar simulation study, generating a true response with various active effects, various main effects, various two-factor interactions. We just used a standard experimental error of 1, and we compared the performance using things like power and type 1 error. Power, which is the proportion of correctly identified active effects, and type 1 error, the proportion of inactive effects that were determined to be active. Again, there's a lot. It's very busy here, so I'll kind of talk you through some of this. Each column represents a different design type, and each row represents a different scenario. So for example, the top row is only 2 active main effects and 2 active interactions. That was our simplest scenario. Down at the bottom, 4 active main effects and 4 active two-factor interactions. So you can kind of visualize this as the easiest scenario at the top and the more difficult scenario down at the bottom. If you look, you can barely see the power box plots at the top. They're almost at 100%. All right, so that's blue box plots, but you can barely see the blue in that very top scenario. And the kind of reddish orange box plot is the type 1 error rates. And you can really see that if there's only 2 active main effects and 2 interactions, power is quite good across all the design types and all of the methods, with the exception of the fact that lasso with leave one out cross-validation had the highest type 1 error rates, which, you know, this is a kind of a high-level look. We're not completely sure why it did not do as well as just lasso with, say, 5-fold cross-validation. Our typical Gauss lasso did well in general. And you can see as we go down, it gets harder and harder to detect the active effects. And you can see that by the time we get to the bottom, we get quite a bit of variability, particularly with things like lasso using cross-validation. Very variable performance, whereas the tried and true Gauss lasso was quite good. I would also say that perhaps using something like regression with leave one out cross-validation was also quite good. So in the end, best subsets regression with leave one out cross-validation had good screening performance. And I note right here, if the design can handle it. If you look all the way to the left, you can see that regression with leave one out cross-validation didn't show up for the MEPI design. And that is because, for whatever reason, the design structure in combination with all subsets regression, it couldn't handle it. So we used the LEAPS package in R, and it crashed almost every time we tried doing regression with leave one out cross-validation with these MEPI designs. We looked at a variety of things as to what in the world might have been causing that. couldn't figure it out. And so perhaps there's a number of linear dependencies that are causing a problem, but to us it was surprising that we could do regular cross-validation, five-fold cross-validation, but we couldn't do leave one out cross-validation with the designs. Very strange. So that's why you're not seeing it in that very far left-hand MEPI designs. But for the other designs, we didn't have a problem. So in the end, best subsets with leave one out cross-validation actually did have good screening performance if the design could handle it. Lasso of CV and leave one out cross-validation produced higher type 1 error rates than the tried and true Gauss lasso methods and the best subsets regression of CV. And so perhaps even though using cross-validation to help tune lasso is a very popular thing in practice, maybe it's not the best thing to do for small structured screening experiments. On the other hand, if you wanted to do something more like all subsets with leave one out cross-validation, it seemed to have pretty good performance. Our main conclusions from all of this is contrary to the literature, regression using CV or leave one out CV doesn't really seem to hurt prediction performance. It seems to be leave one out cross-validation seems to be preferred over k-fold cross-validation to maintain as much of the original structure of the design as possible. But as you'll notice, the performance isn't like this method always recommended, this method never used. That's not what we saw. There was kind of even keel performance across the board in a lot of cases. But what we again noticed was that, particularly with screening, a lot more variable performance the more complex the model got with lasso and cross-validation. And so it's just it's interesting, really, that we weren't seeing we were expecting everything to tank the moment we started using cross-validation because we were, in a sense, destroying the structure of the design. And so more to be done. We are continuing this investigation. One of the things that did not come out of this work is saying, here are all these examples where machine learning is terribly applied to experimental design. That may be coming, but that's not something that we really attempted to address in this work. This particular work was looking at, is it okay to try to use standard regression models or regularization methods with cross-validation in conjunction with designed experiments? And like I said, contrary to the literature, it seems like it's not that bad. Things aren't tanking. We're not seeing this horrible performance. And so I think that it leaves the door open for more things to consider going forward. Definitely more research projects, more ideas to think about when it comes to how do we effectively use these types of strategies when it comes to analyzing experimental designs. Many thanks to my co-authors, Byron Smucker and Maria Weiss. The three of us have worked together for a long time on a variety of projects, and I'm grateful for very good co-authors to help move me through things. And so that is the end of my talk. I think it seems to be almost right on time to make sure there's plenty of time for Q&A. So I do thank you for your attention, and I will stop screen sharing.
Thank you, David. That was an extremely interesting talk. That was extremely interesting.
Thanks, Doug.
And it does not look like we have any questions from our participants. I'm going to just double check with that. Is that the case? Yeah. Okay. So I want to compliment you a lot on this work. This is really quite interesting. Where are you publishing this?
Well, it has not been accepted yet. We have submitted this to a chemometrics journal. Yeah. But we'll see where it ultimately ends up.
Well, I was going to suggest that you send it to the journal that I edit, QREI. I would love to see this paper in that journal because we have a lot of circulation and we have a high impact factor, and I think people would be interested in this work. I've been doing some things kind of similar to this that I should at least tell you a little bit about. and this grew out of a DoD research project sponsored by the Test Management Resources Center. They were trying to encourage uh, use of a better use of experimental designs in doing operational testing, which I'm sure you know that's a big issue,
Yes.
and very important, mandated by Congress, actually. It says you must do operational testing. And it all came about because there were systems deployed back in the 70s that, worked well on in development, but didn't always work the way you wanted them to in the field. And in fact, we've even seen some examples of that where operational testing prevented disasters. The F-35 being the most common one. The original F-35 design that went to operational test, that's supposed to be an aircraft flown by all three of the services that fly, Air Force, Navy, and Marines. And in the original incarnation, the Navy and Marine version would not land on the aircraft carrier. You couldn't land them. The tailhook was too far. The tailhook was too far forward, and so you couldn't catch the wire.
Oh,
And
that certainly sounds like a problem.
and that particular aircraft has variable thrust nozzles, and so you can't just simply jack the thing back 2 feet. Because now you interfere with the whole design of that variable thrust engine. And so there was some significant redesign work that had to be done. And fortunately, they figured this out before they did, before they made 10,000 of the things. But you know, these operational tests tend to be very small experiments, because they're expensive. And they use fractional factorials. And lots of times the fractional factorials are very low resolution. And so you end up with complexities of aliasing. And you'd like to do follow-on experiments to be able to resolve that. But a lot of times you can't because you can't get access to the test resources.
Right.
If you're doing a test out at Edwards Air Force Base and you do a 16-run experiment, and you say, oh, well, we need to do another 8 runs to resolve the confounding. The test management people out there say, well, you can have the range again in 6 months. Yeah, I mean, that's just the way it works. And so I've got interested in all of this years ago, and Brad Jones and I have done a lot of work on identifying non-regular fractions that don't completely correlate main effects and low order interactions. And so I've been doing a lot of work on creating these designs, finding ways to generate these designs, and then analysis methods. And we've looked at some of the analysis methods you talked about. We've looked at lasso, for example, and we've looked at stepwise regression, and we've looked at Danzig selector, and we're not doing anything as exotic as you are. We're using the standard jump implementation of these because that's what we figured the test community is going to use.
Sure.
But they do a pretty nice job of that because with Danzig and with Lasso, they choose the tuning parameter to minimize AICC. Not a bad idea.
Right. I agree.
Yeah, and we have found that ordinary stepwise regression actually works fairly well. Lasso works fairly well. Danzig does not work as well.
Which is
And
surprising.
and I'm surprised at that because I had a master's student that looked at Danzig a few years ago for a couple of the smaller non-regular designs, and Danzig worked pretty well. So I'm sort of mentally confused why it doesn't work as well as so if you have any thoughts along that line, I'd sure like to know about it.
It is interesting. Because I feel like Danzig was recommended initially as the method that we should be using to analyze these designs with complex aliasing.
Right.
Of course, it turns out that it's a little bit harder to implement. So we looked over at Lasso, and the performance was, I haven't seen it being worse. So that's kind of that's interesting. I've seen it doing just as well, but worse, I really am not sure why it perform worse.
Yeah, well, what we found is it depends on a lot on model complexity. If you're, and again, we're working with screening designs, and from 16 run screening designs with between 6 and 14 factors. And now the complexity of the models, we've looked at that. Main effects models that have certain numbers of interactions. And basically, what we found is once we get beyond about 4 or 5 active main effects and about 2 or 3 two-factor interactions, a lot of these methods don't perform as well. And you'd kind of expect that.
Yeah, it's
At
just
least I think.
I would agree when you have 16 runs and you've got, you know, 8 say active effects,
Yeah.
and it's pretty tough, I think,
Well,
to get them all.
there's an old rule of thumb, and I don't know how good it is, but the old rule of thumb is that these screening designs work pretty well as long as the number of active effects does not exceed about half the number of degrees of freedom. And with 16 runs, that's about 7 or 8.
Right.
And but the good news is, I don't know if you've seen that paper by Snee and Bailey. It's in Applied Stochastic Models in Business and Industry. It's a report on screening experiments, and they look at a lot of published examples of screening experiments. And what they ended up finding was that across the board, the average number of active effects emerged in all these studies is about 6,
Oh, just in general.
just in general. And so that's kind of encouraging, I guess. Even though you start off with 10 factors, you're not going to end up with 8 or 9 main effects and 10 two-factor interactions.
Right. Yeah.
It's probably going to be more like a total of 6 or 7 active effects, which it encourages me because I've been preaching using screening experiments for years,
Oh,
and
yes.
then
Same.
this recent research that I've been involved in with non-regular screening designs, it's pointing toward that. Well, if you have models that have no more than about 6 or 7 active effects, they work pretty well. So that's kind of encouraging. But I'm really excited about this work of yours. I really am. And
Yeah, I'm really curious to see where it goes from here. Obviously it's kind of a first look, an initial high level look
yeah,
at does this provide is it just the worst thing in the world to do? And the answer seems to be no, which surprised us initially given the literature. But we also wanted to do this study because we're seeing all these papers that just say, here's the machine learning method that we're going to throw at a designed experiment. So we're thinking, well, if they're going to use it, let's see how well these things are doing.
yeah. Yeah, I've seen some of that, and I've been nervously skeptical.
Yeah.
Might be a good, because I know a lot about how well standard methods work, and there's not a lot of flaws in the way standard methods work.
I agree. And so it's been surprising to see this push for for it, other than maybe it's just is it just new and shiny, so that's what we should be doing. That's I don't know. I was just surprised by the explosion almost of
Yeah,
papers that you can find now where they're doing this.
and I think it never hurts to try to investigate this and compare it to standard methods, which you've made a heck of a good start on that. And I would be curious to see you maybe as you do more work in this area to take a look at in the screening study to take a look at one or two non-regular screening designs to see how they operate in this area.
Yeah, I would agree. It was a limited study, but yes, we could certainly expand the scope of the different types of designs we're looking at.
Well, I think that there are situations where follow-on experiments are just not easily doable. And so these non-regular designs have great potential, I think, to help you untangle complex relationships between main effects and low order interactions. And that's what you expect to find anyway. You don't expect to find 3 and 4 factor interactions as active.
Right.
So if you can successfully untangle main effects and 2 factor interactions in a lot of cases, that's really good news. At least to me, that's really good news.
And I'm still seeing a lot of use of regular designs. I think because they're just so easy to construct
Sure.
and they have I shouldn't say the analysis is simple, but it's perhaps more straightforward than a non-regular design. But I am uh, I probably do more work these days with non-regular designs than I do with the regular ones.
Yeah. Well, I think part of what motivates the use of regular designs is most practitioners are using standard software. They're using Jump, they're using Minitab, and what's available there are the standard regular designs. And then, as you say, they have the analysis method built in, so it's really easy to do that. If you're going to use one of these non-regular designs, you've got to first of all you've got to hunt down who's published the test matrix,
Right.
and
Yes.
then you have to load it up, and then you have to think about how you're going to do the analysis. So there's a lot of extra work involved, and um, we we do have for a very special case uh, of 6, 7, and 8 factors. We do have a different new analysis method that outperforms everything. One of my PhD students developed it. Her name is Carly Metcalf, and she teaches at RIT. And she developed an analysis method that we call AIMS, AIMS, Alias Informed Model Selection, and it works fantastically. It's better than anything else we ever tested, but it only works for the 6, 7, and 8 factor design case. We haven't extended it to the more complex designs. But
You're talking about uh, you put together analysis strategies specific to these no confounding
yes,
designs?
yes,
Oh.
and they are essentially variable selection identification rules that are designed based on the alias structures of the designs.
Oh, very interesting. Do you
Yeah.
have to hard code it? Like
Yep.
these rules? Come up with them
We
before you do anything?
Yep. And we have 2 papers published that describe those. One covered just the 6 factor case, and then the other one covered the 7 and 8 factor case. And if you're interested in those, I can see if I can round up copies of them and send them to you.
Oh, that'd be great. Absolutely.
Well, the only thing that might slow me down is my recent computer disaster. Did I tell you about my computer disaster?
You did not know.
Well, this is truly tragic. Okay. Over the years, I have collected PDF copies of every paper that I have ever published. Wow.
Well, that's a lot. That's a lot of
Well, the current count is 307.
oh my gosh.
Okay. 307 journal papers. Okay. And I had them all in files by years. Okay. Starting with like 1969. Okay. So right up to, so I have all these files on my computer. And the reason I had them is that for years I kept paper copies. And people would write, in the old days before it was easy to find things, people would write you and say, "Oh, I'd like to have a copy of paper XYZ." And so you'd have to dig out the paper copy, make a Xerox of the darn thing, and mail it to them. Remember that? Yeah, you're too young to remember that.
Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah.
So anyway, to avoid that, I had these PDF copies. Ooh, great. And so if somebody wanted a copy of paper XYZ, just tell me what year it is, and I'll go into that file and I'll find the paper and email it to you. Great. Well, guess what? I opened up one of those files about a year ago, and every single PDF paper that was in that file for that year had vanished.
Huh.
Gone. It's gone.
Seems like a very strange thing to happen.
Well, I figured, okay, maybe it's just this one year. Nope, it's all of them. Every single copy, every single one has disappeared.
And no explanation.
And not only that, we can't figure out where they are. Supposedly, everything is backed up. We have an internal backup set. They're not there.
It's almost like someone is playing a big joke on you there. That's
Sabotage. It's
yeah.
sabotage. It's what it is. But this is very depressing because I would really like to get I really like to get them back. But you know how much work that is?
Oh,
Yeah,
that's a
unbelievable.
lot to have to find those old papers and scan them back in or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or well, maybe there's most of them are available in electronic form now. But anyway, I'm thinking about having to hire a graduate student to help me do this. It's just depressing.
That would be depressing for sure.
David, we're running out of time here. I want to thank you so much for agreeing to do this. This is a fascinating topic, and keep me up to date on what's going on. And if you decide you want to submit that paper to, if you don't like what the way they're treating you at chemometrics, uh, uh, you know, I'm not sure the right people will read that paper at Technometrics. But think about sending it to QRI, because I would love to see that paper published in something that I consider to be a mainstream paper on experimental design.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I'm very curious to see where this goes as far as just
Yeah.
what's next.
Well,
'Cause I definitely
and,
think
and
there's more.
and I've worked some with Maria in the past also, and she's a great collaborator. So
She is. A lot of energy.
yeah, she sure is. Well, thank you again, and like I say, keep me informed as to what's going on, because I'm really curious about this.
Well, I most certainly will. Thanks for the
Okay,
info.
our next fireside chat will be in January 26th. We're taking December off. More information will be posted in LinkedIn, and you'll find past recordings in the resources tab in Coursera. And this one, the recording for this one will be up pretty soon. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in January, and hope you have a lovely Thanksgiving and holiday season.